All right, let's go.
Number 12. Arsenic, the poison of kings, the cure for syphilis, a modern cancer drug. Arsenic has been killing people deliberately for longer than almost any other substance in recorded history. Its colorless, odorless, water-soluble form, arsenic trioxide, was known in medieval Europe as inheritance powder, used by aristocratic families to accelerate the transfer of estates from one generation to the next. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning closely mimicked cholera, vomiting, diarrhea, cardiovascular collapse, making it nearly undetectable in an era before forensic medicine. Hippocrates used arsenic compounds in 400 BC to treat ulcers. Traditional Chinese medicine used it from at least 200 BC. Paracelsus prescribed it. Thomas Fowler developed Fowler's solution in 1786, a 1% solution of potassium arsenite that became one of the most widely prescribed medicines in the world for the next century. Physicians used it for everything: psoriasis, syphilis, asthma, malaria, leukemia. The arsenic and Fowler's solution was killing some patients slowly while appearing to help others. In 1909, Paul Ehrlich developed salvarsan, arsphonamine, a targeted arsenic compound that was the first modern chemotherapy drug in history. Specifically designed to kill Treponema pallidum, the bacterium causing syphilis, while leaving the patient alive. It was called the magic bullet, the first drug in history developed through systematic laboratory testing rather than folk tradition. Arsenic was the active agent. Then in 2000, the FDA approved arsenic trioxide, the same compound that had been poisoning people for millennia, as a treatment for acute promyelocytic leukemia, a specific subtype of blood cancer in which arsenic at therapeutic doses causes the cancerous cells to differentiate into normal cells rather than continuing to proliferate. The poison does not kill the cancer cells, it tells them to stop being cancer cells. It is now a first-line treatment. Patients go into complete remission. Arsenic trioxide is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines as of 2026. Number 11. Mercury. 3,000 years of medicinal use. 3,000 years of poisoning patients. Mercury has been used medically for longer than almost any other substance. Traditional Chinese medicine documented its use from the Han Dynasty, approximately 200 BC. Indian Ayurvedic medicine used it extensively. Persian physician Rhazes in the 10th century AD recommended mercury ointments for scabies, effectively because mercury is toxic to the mites causing the disease, even though it was simultaneously toxic to the patient absorbing it through their skin. Mercury's most infamous medical use was for syphilis. Rubbing mercury ointment into the skin was the standard treatment for syphilis in Europe from the late 15th century through the early 20th century, over 400 years. The treatment was brutal. Mercury is toxic to the nervous system, the kidneys, and virtually every major organ. Patients lost teeth, lost hair, developed neurological damage. Many died from the treatment rather than the disease. The saying of the era was a night with Venus leads to a lifetime with Mercury. The treatment worked, very partially because the mercury was toxic enough to kill or suppress the syphilis bacteria, but the therapeutic window between a dose that suppressed infection and a dose that killed the patient was essentially non-existent. Mercury compounds were used as diuretics, calomel, mercurous chloride, until the mid-20th century. Organomercury compounds were used as antiseptics and preservatives in vaccines. Thiamersyl, a mercury-containing compound, was used as a vaccine preservative for decades. Its link to harm in standard vaccine doses has not been established by large-scale epidemiological studies, but its use has been phased out in most countries as a precaution. Today, mercury is considered extremely hazardous. Its use in medicine has been almost entirely eliminated. But the reason it was used for 3,000 years is real. Heavy metals are toxic to microorganisms as well as to humans, and at certain doses, mercury reliably kills pathogens. The dose makes the poison. For mercury, that dose window was always catastrophically narrow. Generations of patients paid the price before anyone figured out where the line actually was. Number 10. Belladonna,
the plant that dilates pupils, stops hearts, and saves lives. Atropa belladonna, deadly nightshade. Every part of this plant is poisonous: berries, leaves, roots, stem. The alkaloids inside it, primarily atropine and scopolamine, block acetylcholine receptors throughout the nervous system. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that drives glandular secretions, slows the heart, constricts pupils, and stimulates smooth muscle contraction. Block it completely and the results are racing heart, dilated pupils, dry mouth, hallucinations, inability to sweat, and, at sufficient doses, death. It was historically used as a murder weapon. It was used by Cesare Borgia. It has been used in warfare. Renaissance Venetian women used it for cosmetic purposes. Drops of belladonna extract in the eyes dilated the pupils. Wide pupils were considered beautiful and attractive. Belladonna, beautiful woman. The name is a cosmetic tribute. The women using it were slowly damaging their eyesight and possibly microdosing themselves with a lethal alkaloid. Here's what atropine actually does at medical doses. It increases heart rate. In bradycardia, a dangerously slow heart rate, atropine is the first-line emergency drug. Given intravenously, it can pull a patient's heart rate back from the edge of cardiac arrest in minutes. It is on the WHO essential medicines list. Every emergency medical kit in the world carries it. Atropine also treats organophosphate poisoning, the class of poison used in nerve agents and many pesticides. Organophosphates work by blocking the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine, causing acetylcholine to accumulate uncontrollably. The antidote is a drug that blocks acetylcholine receptors, atropine. The antidote to nerve agent poisoning is itself derived from one of history's most notorious plant poisons. Scopolamine, the other major alkaloid in belladonna, is used in transdermal patches to prevent motion sickness. The same molecule that caused hallucinations and delirium in poisoning victims prevents nausea in therapeutic doses. The plant that Lucretia Borgia allegedly used to poison her enemies is today sitting in hospital crash carts worldwide.
Number 9. Curare, the arrow poison that made modern surgery possible. Indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin, including the Tupinamba and other groups, had refined curare for centuries before European contact. Made from the plant Chondrodendron tomentum and several other species, it was applied to dart and arrow tips. A hunter or warrior hit by a curare-tipped projectile experienced progressive paralysis, first the extremities, then the trunk, then the respiratory muscles. Death from asphyxiation followed, the heart continuing to beat while the diaphragm could no longer move. Curare does not affect the digestive system. Animals killed with curare-tipped arrows were safe to eat. The poison is only lethal if it enters the bloodstream. Eaten, it passes harmlessly through the digestive tract. This was a precisely engineered hunting tool. In 1942, the anesthesiologist Harold Griffith in Montreal administered curare to a patient undergoing an appendectomy. He paralyzed the patient's muscles with a controlled dose of curare during surgery. Previously, surgeons had needed to administer dangerously deep levels of anesthesia to prevent patients from moving during operations, deep enough that the anesthesia itself carried significant mortality risk. Curare allowed surgeons to use lighter anesthesia while maintaining complete muscular paralysis. The patient was unconscious, but not dangerously deeply so. This single application transformed surgery. Modern anesthesia, the complete, controllable, reversible paralysis of a patient during surgery, is built on compounds derived from curare. Tubocurarenine was the first. Synthetic derivatives followed: pancuronium, vecuronium, and rocuronium, all of them neuromuscular blocking agents working on the same mechanism curare exploits, blocking the acetylcholine receptors at the neuromuscular junction, preventing motor nerve signals from reaching muscle, producing complete, reversible, controlled paralysis. Every surgical operation requiring general anesthesia since 1942 has used this chemistry. An arrow poison from the Amazon rainforest made modern surgery possible. Without it, the majority of surgical procedures performed in the 20th and 21st centuries could not have been conducted safely. Number 8. Botulinum toxin, the most lethal substance known to science.
Also, Botox. Botulinum toxin is the most acutely toxic substance ever measured. A lethal dose for a human is estimated at 2 nanograms per kilogram of body weight injected intravenously. 1 nanogram is 1 billionth of a gram. A single gram of purified botulinum toxin, less than the weight of a paperclip, distributed evenly and optimally, could theoretically kill over 1 million people. It is the only substance for which the WHO has considered that biological terrorism using it is a realistic scenario. It works by cleaving proteins at the motor junction that allow motor neurons to release acetylcholine into the synapse. No acetylcholine release, no muscle contraction. Progressive flaccid paralysis, starting from the face and spreading downward. In botulism poisoning, death comes from the diaphragm and respiratory muscles becoming unable to contract. Botulinum toxin type A, trade name Botox, is the most commercially administered pharmaceutical in the world by number of injections. When injected in nanogram quantities into specific muscles, it produces controlled, localized, reversible paralysis lasting 3 to 6 months. The global Botox market was valued at approximately $9.8 billion USD in 2023. It is used cosmetically to reduce facial wrinkles. It is used medically to treat cervical dystonia, a painful involuntary twisting of the neck muscles, blepharospasm, uncontrolled eye blinking, hemifacial spasm, chronic migraines, FDA approved for this indication in 2010, hyperhidrosis, excessive sweating, overactive bladder, spasticity following stroke. The 2024 comprehensive review in the journal Biomedicines documented evidence that botulinum toxin effects extend beyond the injection site, modulating distant brain regions involved in dystonia control. Research in 2024 trials showed a 79% reduction in sweating at 1-year follow-up in hyperhidrosis patients. It is being investigated for premature ejaculation, depression, and chronic pain. The most lethal substance ever identified, used cosmetically by millions of people every year. The dose, in this case measured in billionths of a gram, makes the poison. Number 7. Strychnine, the nerve stimulant that ran in the 1904 Olympics. Strychnine comes from the seeds of Strychnos nux vomica, a tree native to India and Southeast Asia. It causes uncontrolled stimulation of the entire nervous system. Every nerve fires, every muscle contracts simultaneously. The result is convulsions, violent, arching, characteristic, in which the body bends backward into a rigid arch called opisthotonus. Death comes from exhaustion and asphyxiation, the respiratory muscles seizing in constant contraction. For approximately 150 years, it was standard medical practice. Physicians prescribed it as a tonic and stimulant for weakness, paralysis, nerve damage, constipation, and general debility. The logic was not entirely irrational. At subconvulsive doses, strychnine does stimulate the nervous system. Muscle tone increases, reflexes sharpen, constipation is relieved because it stimulates gut motility. It was included in pharmacopoeias, official medical drug lists across Europe and North America well into the 20th century. At the 1904 St. Louis Olympics, marathon gold medalist Thomas Hicks was given injections of strychnine and brandy during the race by his trainers as a stimulant. He crossed the finish line hallucinating, barely conscious, and nearly dead. The strychnine had reached a near-toxic dose during the exertion of the race. His gold medal was awarded after the initially declared winner was disqualified for catching a ride in a car. Strychnine was available over the counter in consumer products in the United States until the 1980s. Some rat poisons still use it. It was prescribed through the 1930s, a period when it was one of the most common causes of lethal poisoning in children who found it in medicine cabinets. Today, strychnine has no accepted medical use in any country. Its story is an example of how the line between effective and toxic was drawn so close together that the margin for error was never really manageable. Number 6. Radium, the glowing element that was added to toothpaste. In 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium, its remarkable property. It glowed in the dark. It produced light from an invisible energy nobody fully understood. In the early 20th century, the idea that some invisible force could emanate from matter and produce visible light carried associations that were both scientific and quasi-mystical. Radium felt vital, alive. The word radioactive was new. Nobody knew what it meant for health. Within years of its discovery, radium was sold as a health product. Radithor, radium dissolved in water, was marketed as a cure for over 160 ailments. Athletes and socialites drank it daily as a tonic. Luminous radium paint was used on watch dials. The women who painted those dials, the radium girls, were told to lick their brushes to get a fine point. They developed radiation-induced cancers of the jaw. Their bones glowed in the dark in hospital x-rays. Court cases brought by the Radium Girls in the late 1920s were landmark legal battles that established workers' rights to sue employers for health damages, some of the earliest occupational safety litigation in U.S. history. Radium toothpaste was sold in Germany. Radium water crocks allowed people to irradiate their drinking water at home. Steel magnate Eben Byers drank multiple bottles of Radithor for 2 years because it seemed to improve his golf game. His jaw and much of his skull dissolved from radiation necrosis. A Wall Street Journal headline on his death in 1932 read, "The radium water worked fine until his jaw fell off." The medical logic was not entirely absent. Radiation kills cells. Cancer is uncontrolled cell division. Radiotherapy, using controlled radiation to target tumors, is one of the primary cancer treatments of the 20th and 21st centuries. It works on the same principle as Radithor rather than consumed indiscriminately. Marie Curie herself developed aplastic anemia from decades of radiation exposure and died of it in 1934. The line between therapeutic radiation and lethal radiation is a matter of dosage, targeting, and specificity. Radithor crossed every one of those lines simultaneously. Modern radiotherapy threads the needle that Radithor completely missed. Number 5. Cone snail venom. A shell that kills in minutes, a painkiller 100 times stronger than morphine. Cone snails are small, beautiful, decorated marine snails found in tropical waters across the Indo-Pacific. They are also one of the most dangerous animals in the ocean. Their venom delivery system is a harpoon-like tooth that can strike in any direction, including backward, and inject a complex cocktail of conotoxins. There's no antivenom. Symptoms of a significant envenomation include intense pain, progressive paralysis, respiratory failure, and cardiovascular collapse. There have been over 100 recorded human deaths from cone snail stings. The advice given to people who handle them recreationally is simple. If stung, go to hospital. There's nothing else to do. The venom contains hundreds of distinct peptides, small protein chains called conotoxins, each evolved to paralyze prey with extraordinary specificity. Different conotoxins target different ion channels and receptors in the nervous system with a precision that no synthetic drug has yet matched. They evolved over millions of years to be the most targeted neurochemical weapons in the animal kingdom. In 2004, the FDA approved zinacotide, a synthetic version of a conotoxin from the cone snail species Conus magus, under the trade name Prialt. It is used for the treatment of severe chronic pain in patients for whom morphine and other opioids have failed. It is injected directly into the cerebrospinal fluid via an implanted pump. It works by blocking a specific type of calcium channel in the spinal cord, N-type voltage-gated calcium channels, that is a primary pathway of pain signal transmission. Block that channel and pain signals cannot reach the brain. It has no abuse potential, produces no tolerance, and causes no respiratory depression. It is 100 times more potent than morphine at equal doses. The venom that kills in minutes, extracted in controlled doses from a tiny snail in a tropical lagoon, is now being used to manage intractable chronic pain in patients for whom every other option has failed. Multiple additional conotoxins are in clinical trials as of 2026 for pain, cardiovascular disease, and neurological disorders.
Number 4. Foxglove digitalis, the wildflower that controls the heart.
Digitalis purpurea, the common foxglove, a tall flowering plant with tubular purple-spotted flowers native to Europe. Highly toxic. Ingestion causes nausea, vomiting, bradycardia, heart block, and death. The cardiac glycosides it contains, digoxin, digitoxin, act on the sodium-potassium ATPase pump in cardiac muscle cells, altering the electrical properties of the heart. In 1785, English physician William Withering published an account of the foxglove and some of its medical uses. He had observed that a folk remedy used by a Shropshire herbalist, a complex mixture of herbs, was effective at treating dropsy, which we now know as congestive heart failure with associated fluid retention. He methodically identified the active ingredient, Digitalis, tested it in 163 patients over 10 years, documented the outcomes, and published a landmark of clinical medicine. Digitalis slows the heart rate by increasing vagal tone, the parasympathetic signaling that regulates cardiac rhythm. It simultaneously increases the force of each heartbeat. For patients in heart failure, where the heart beats rapidly but weakly, unable to pump blood efficiently, Digitalis was transformative. The heart slowed down and each beat became stronger. The therapeutic window is extremely narrow. A dose that controls heart failure and a dose that causes fatal arrhythmia differ by a factor of 2 or 3. Digoxin toxicity was a common clinical problem throughout the 20th century as physicians calibrated doses in individual patients. Today, it is still used, most commonly for atrial fibrillation and heart failure, with far more precise dosing and monitoring than Withering had available. The toxic cardiac glycoside from a common garden flower is today a standard prescription medication in every cardiologist's toolkit. William Withering's 10-year systematic study of a folk remedy was also one of the earliest examples of what we would now recognize as a clinical trial.
Number 3. Willow bark and aspirin, the poison that dissolved in water. Willow bark has been used medicinally since at least ancient Egypt. Papyrus records from 1543 BC describe its use for fever and pain. The Greeks used it. Indigenous peoples across the Americas used it independently. The active compound is salicin, a precursor to salicylic acid. Salicylic acid relieves pain and reduces fever. It also causes severe gastric irritation, stomach ulcers, and bleeding in the doses required for therapeutic effect. Using willow bark as medicine was a trade-off between pain relief and stomach damage. In 1897, Felix Hoffmann at Bayer AG in Germany acetylated salicylic acid, added an acetyl group to its chemical structure. The product was acetyl salicylic acid, aspirin. The acetyl group reduces the gastric irritation while preserving the therapeutic effect. Bayer patented it in 1909. It became one of the best-selling drugs in human history. At sufficient doses, aspirin causes salicylate poisoning, tinnitus, respiratory alkalosis, metabolic acidosis, confusion, and death. Children given large doses of aspirin to reduce fever can develop Ray's syndrome, a devastating condition causing liver failure and brain swelling. Aspirin is contraindicated in children with viral illnesses for this reason. At therapeutic doses, aspirin inhibits an enzyme called cyclooxygenase, reducing the production of prostaglandins, the molecules that drive inflammation, pain, and fever. At low doses, 75 to 100 milligrams per day, it irreversibly inhibits platelet aggregation and is used globally for the prevention of heart attacks and strokes in patients at cardiovascular risk. The compound derived from a plant whose active substance was too toxic to use directly has become one of the most important cardiovascular drugs in the world.
Number 2. Snake venom. Paralysis, death, and a life-saving blood pressure drug. Snake venoms are extraordinarily complex chemical libraries. Each species has evolved a different cocktail optimized to immobilize prey as quickly as possible. Hemotoxins destroy blood clotting factors and red blood cells. Cytotoxins destroy tissue at the bite site. Neurotoxins block neuromuscular transmission. Many venoms contain multiple classes simultaneously. The diversity of chemical targets they have evolved to hit has made them a rich source of pharmaceutical leads. In the 1940s, Brazilian pharmacologist Mauricio Rocha e Silva was studying the venom of the Botrops jararaca, the lance-head pit viper common in Brazil. The venom caused a dramatic drop in blood pressure. He isolated the mechanism, a peptide in the venom that inhibited an enzyme called angiotensin-converting enzyme, or ACE. ACE converts an inactive molecule into angiotensin II, a powerful vasoconstrictor that raises blood pressure. Block ACE and blood pressure drops. Chemist Sergio Ferreira refined the active peptide from the venom in the 1960s. Molecular pharmacologist David Cushman and physician Miguel Ondetti at Squibb used it as a blueprint to design captopril, the first ACE inhibitor which was FDA approved in 1981. ACE inhibitors are now one of the most widely prescribed drug classes on Earth, used for hypertension, heart failure, diabetic neuropathy, and prevention of heart attacks. Hundreds of millions of people take them daily. The entire drug class traces directly to the venom of a Brazilian pit viper. Tirofiban, derived from the saw-scaled viper, is used to prevent blood clots during heart attacks. Eptifibid, derived from pygmy rattlesnake venom, serves the same purpose. Batrazoban from the lancehead viper is used as a surgical hemostatic agent to stop bleeding. The snake that kills with its venom has been giving medicine drugs that save lives for over 40 years.
Number 1. The principle itself. The dose makes the poison, and the poison makes the medicine. Paracelsus stated it in 1538. But he was describing something that medicine keeps rediscovering in every era. Every chemotherapy drug is a poison. Every one of them kills cells indiscriminately at high doses and targets specific malfunctioning cellular processes at therapeutic doses. Cyclophosphamide, used to treat leukemia and lymphoma, was derived from mustard gas, the chemical weapon used in World War I. Nitrogen mustard compounds cause DNA alkylation, cross-linking DNA strands so cells cannot replicate. In warfare, this destroyed every tissue it contacted. In chemotherapy directed at a tumor, it does the same thing selectively to rapidly dividing cells. Methotrexate, used for cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, and psoriasis, blocks folate metabolism. At high doses, it kills bone marrow and causes organ failure. At low doses, it selectively suppresses the immune system's overactive response in autoimmune disease. Thalidomide caused one of the worst pharmaceutical disasters in history. Thousands of children born with severe limb malformations to mothers who took it for morning sickness in the 1950s and 60s. It was withdrawn worldwide. Then, in 1998, the FDA approved it for treatment of multiple myeloma, a blood cancer, and leprosy. The same drug that caused catastrophic birth defects in therapeutic doses extends life in cancer patients. It's used under strict prescribing protocols, every dose tracked, every patient registered. The poison and the medicine are the same molecule. Botulinum toxin, arsenic, curare, snake venom, cone snail poison, foxglove alkaloids, belladonna, all of them on the World Health Organization's essential medicines list or in active clinical use as of 2026. The most dangerous substances ever identified are not different in kind from the medicines in your cabinet. They are the same class of compounds, acting on the same receptors through the same cellular mechanisms. The line between them is a number, a specific dose, a specific route of administration, a specific tissue being targeted. That line is what medicine has been trying to find, precisely, reliably, safely, for the entire history of human civilization. 12 poisons. Arsenic, poison of medieval murderers. First modern chemotherapy drug, essential cancer medicine in 2026. Mercury, used for syphilis for 400 years while slowly killing the patients being treated. Belladonna, Renaissance eye drops that damaged vision and now treats cardiac arrest. Curare, arrow poison from the Amazon rainforest that made modern surgery possible in 1942. Botulinum toxin,
the most lethal substance ever measured, injected into millions of faces every year. Strychnine, nervous system stimulant prescribed by physicians for 150 years, used at the 1904 Olympics, and now used only for rats. Radium, the glowing element added to toothpaste and water until jaws started dissolving. Cone snail venom kills in minutes, 100 times stronger than morphine, FDA-approved painkiller of last resort. Foxglove, wildflower toxin that controls the failing heart. Willow bark, too toxic to take directly, chemically modified into aspirin, now one of the most important cardiovascular drugs on Earth. Snake venom, blood pressure drugs from pit viper compounds used by hundreds of millions of people, and the principle that ties them all together. The dose makes the poison, and at the right dose, the poison makes the medicine. The most dangerous things in the world are also some of the most useful. That is not a coincidence. It is chemistry. Subscribe to Cosmic Hives. See you in the next one.